Hello and welcome to a review over on First Geek 411. I'm Cameron. Today we're going to be talking about Chronicles of Faith, David, the Shepherd, which is issue 0, the prologue. Big shout out to Brainy Pixel and Mercy Way for providing this to us for free. And of course you can find Yvonne and Brandon over on episode 159. I'll try to put a card up, I don't know which direction, in one of the corners. So that if people want to go and check out and hear them talk more about comics in general, but especially Chronicles of Faith, they can go and do that over on that episode. And then as like a quick caveat to get out of the way, we're not going to do like a full review in the sense of like 0 out of 10 or anything like that. And we're kind of just going to talk through it. And then at the end, I'll kind of give some final thoughts. And also I'm coming at this as someone who has a degree in Bible. So I'm pretty familiar with the story of David. And so kind of just getting that call out of the way. And so overall, today there's going to be 4 major parts. We're going to talk about the plot, the art, the cons, and then at the end, the recommendation. So let's get into Chronicles of Faith, David. Okay, so let's get into the plot. So this is very much a story focused around, obviously the story of David. There's a frame narrative that is going on where this is King David telling stories of his young life to his son Solomon. And in issue 0, as you can see, this is the prologue, the shepherd. This very much focuses on some of those stories of David in that time. There is a pretty big focus on the story from 1 Samuel 17, which is David and Goliath. And then there's a bit of a story that leads up to 1 Samuel 16, where David is anointed king by Samuel. The story itself takes some pretty obvious embellishments with the story that is presented in the Bible, and very much kind of is focusing on those ideas of filling in what is going on in the story, kind of in between the chapters of the Bible. So one of those is that we get a lot of examples of David making reference to things that he did in the past, or saying that these are the types of things he would do. We also get some pretty interesting looks at the Psalms and things like that. One of the best things for me as someone who's relatively familiar with the story of David was seeing how these embellishments actually can tie into other parts of the Bible. And so at one point, David has lost a sheep, and he has 99 that are safe and in their pen, and he has to go and find that one lost sheep. And this is a really fantastic reference to Luke 15, the parable of the lost sheep, which happens to be one of my favorite parables. And so I really enjoyed that reference and kind of getting to see those details where we're getting bits and pieces of the actual narrative out of order, and then we are coming back in to seeing how that kind of affects David's life as a whole. And then overall, like I said, the plot, it's kind of funny because it is a close retelling of the parts that it is retelling, and then it kind of goes and does these embellishments. And I enjoy that. I think that's a good part of the story. It's a good way to kind of bring this in versus just doing like a chapter by chapter telling of David's life. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how they're going to tie in these references, these little nods, whether to parables from Jesus, or if it's just going to be other tie-ins to other specific parts of David's story. So I'm looking forward to seeing how those play out and seeing what they're going to be doing with those in the future. Okay, let's get into the art for our next section. And overall, we've been hanging out on the cover. We've been looking at David. And I have to say, with kind of one major caveat that we'll get to in the cons, I really like the character design of this story. They did a good job on young David, making him look cool, as well as what they do with in that frame narrative of adult dad David and young Solomon, and kind of how those characters still look interesting. They look cool. They look, again, they did a great job with it. And they also did a great job with that art design of leading up to the battle against Goliath. It kind of felt like a big boss fight to me, and I thought that was really cool, very video gamey, which I'm, of course, am all in on. One of the other big things I really liked about the art is when we get to these types of pages and we get these psalms, or we get these ideas of prayers that David is bringing. And I really like the change in style as David is reflecting on these things. And it's very like whimsical. It's very, I'm going to say arty, which I know is like not a great review word or whatever, but like, it just felt like a really cool shift from everything being in bubbles, everything being in like the normal frames of how you get comic book narrative. And so I really liked that. And I don't necessarily have a super critical eye for art. I'm definitely someone who would not define themselves remotely as an artist. And so I'm sure somebody that has more of a background in that kind of thing would have more to say on this topic, but that's not really me. And so I'm going to not try to like sound smart or anything like that, other than, again, to say I enjoyed the art. I think the character design is cool. And overall, I really liked the majority of what was going on in the art. So we talked about the plot, we talked about the art. Now let's get into what I'll say are the main cons of this story. And one of the first things that jumped out to me when we were sent this copy was how none of the characters look Middle Eastern. It felt very like Sunday school. I say as someone who like grew up in the church and is used to seeing these pictures on the walls of biblical events and all the people are super white. That was one of the things that I would like to have seen be a bit more authentic, especially in a story that feels like it's trying to be this very loving retelling of who David was, how he got to where he is now, and kind of what that means for him as he's now trying to impart these lessons on his son. And I would have loved to have seen a bit more focus on that actual heritage of the people that went through these stories. That is, for the most part, my biggest con of this. And then the other thing that kind of got me thinking is how will they surprise us in future episodes? Again, I'm someone that's very familiar with the story. Maybe I'm not quite the target audience in that regard. I think it's going to be very difficult to give this loving retelling and have people want to, like what's the cliffhanger? Like, we know David's going to live, like, because we know that this is going to be a pretty close retelling. Like, so there's not going to be these moments where we have these big battles and it's going to be, will David make it? So I'm super interested to see how that is going to work out, and how this is, or if this is going to be something that for people with that more of a background in the story of David, if there can be those ways, those teases, or if what we get is those cool references, like I referenced when we were talking about the plot, where they're going to bring in these parables, they're going to bring in these other stories and kind of give us that tease and say, hey, here's the Easter egg for you. And so I'm curious if they'll be able to balance both of those things, but those are my two major cons. Okay, so with that, we went through the plot, the art, the cons. Now let's get into the very end, the recommendations. I said at the beginning that this wasn't going to be a score from 0 to 10. I'd much rather talk about the story, talk about what I liked, what I didn't like, and kind of get into that side of the discussion rather than sticking a score on the end. And when I do reviews, I like to focus on the idea of, would I recommend this product, and then who would I recommend it for? So overall, I really enjoyed the story. I am someone who enjoys those embellishments. I didn't come into this looking for a super literal retelling from the Bible of the story of David. If that is something that you did come in looking for, I could definitely see that this comic book might not be for you. But I would kind of hazard a guess that if you're one of those people that wants that super literal telling, you're probably not reading comic books, or not reading this type of comic book. Maybe that's the better way to say that. And so I enjoyed that. And that's definitely something that I think would be a good jumping off point for people to get an introduction to the story of David. I definitely would be hesitant to give this to somebody and say, hey, read this. It's about David. It's from the Bible, because of those embellishments. But again, I think personally, those were some of my favorite parts, but that is something that I would kind of be reluctant just in terms of handing this over to someone that didn't have that background. This as a prologue, as an issue, is about 20 pages, which feels, or just over 20 pages. It feels pretty normal for a comic book. And as a prologue, I definitely think it does a good job representing what the story will be in future issues. We will have adult David and young Solomon. we will have adult David telling these stories to his son and kind of trying to impart the wisdom of what he learned. I'm definitely curious to how this is going to play out with some of the future parts of David's life. And I don't necessarily think you have to know much about the Bible or the story of David to enjoy this, but it definitely is something that helps when it comes to at least having that passing knowledge. And again, I would be very reluctant to just hand this to somebody and say, this is the story of David. I don't think that they're doing anything like crazy out there with the story, but it's one of those that I would definitely want to make sure people understood that they are trying to tell this cool take on the story that is loyal to the source of the Bible, of the Holy Word, but is also not this strict retelling. As someone who used to be a minister, I can definitely see this being something that I would give out to students as we were starting a quarter where we are going to be looking at the life of David. I could definitely see it being like that type of resource, and I can definitely see it being that style of resource for churches, for ministries as a whole, where this is something that goes with what you're talking about. And then when you come back the next week, and then when you look at the events, you talk about what was true to the Bible versus what are the embellishments. You can kind of walk through the references and things like that. I definitely think that was really cool and is something that would be a very good way for a ministry to use this type of resource. At the very end of this, there are some Devo questions, which I think are really cool. I will say they are relatively shallow, which I don't think is a problem. As y'all saw earlier when we were on the cover, this is something for all ages. And so I definitely think that those questions are a really good jumping off point, especially if you're working with younger people. So when it comes to those types of thoughts, getting a conversation going, there's nothing here that's going to like stump people. But yeah, I feel like this is a very good jumping off point to getting into a bigger conversation, a bigger look on David's life and these events. I'm looking forward to seeing how they will continue this story in The Heart of a King, which is going to be the issue 1. So for when that comes out, I'm definitely curious to what that's going to be and how they're going to take those looks at what David will be like, and especially what his mistakes will be like once we get to that part of the story. So overall, definitely would recommend. It is something that I very much enjoyed, and if you would like a copy, you can find it over on mercyways.com or brainypixel.com. Again, big shout out to them for providing us with this copy. And if you have any questions about my review or my thoughts, feel free to post them in the comments down below. And I'll do my best to get to and answer all of those that are there. And we'll also put a call out for their social medias. So if you would like to reach out to Mercy Way or Brainy Pixel, you can do that as well. That'll be down in the description below. So until next time, hope you have a great day. And remember, I love you.